we know what we're talking about?
Season 3.
Hi, I'm John Stevens.
This is Matt Russell.
This
And this is Pod Have Mercy.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Man, you're doing way better than I'm doing. You're retired.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about that, but I am retired. So
Well, officially retired, which means you don't have to, you can just tell, you don't have to put up with anything you don't want to put up with.
Well, there is something really wonderful about that. Although it's just amazing when you're free to say no, some of that stuff just goes away. And that's nice too.
Well, you went out of retirement and then got a full-time job.
Oh, say again?
Oh, I said you went out of retirement and then got a full-time job at the TMF. So,
Yeah, that's good. And and I have a little pastoring gig on the side. And I mean, it's, I'm not one to want to just be sitting around doing nothing.
Where are you pastoring? Beeville?
Yeah, once a month. So, Matt knows about this. We have in Beeville a very small United Methodist African-American church. It was begun in 1888 by 6 former enslaved persons. And it has been going, although there is not a very large African-American population, it's been going consistently since 1888. And but they don't have a pastor. I mean, it's sort of gotten, you go from, they were on a 2-point charge for years and years and years. And then, then it was a local pastor. I mean, they had an elder they've had an elder at a number of points. And then we moved from an elder to a local pastor, and then we moved to a part-time local pastor. And then we moved to a lay person who's like a lay speaker coming in. And then when the pandemic hit and she was old and her health was bad anyway, there was nobody. Wow. And so it's embarrassing to say, Matt's heard me say this too, that I've been here now 6 years. And I just wasn't thinking about, wonder what's happened to them, except finally one morning I was out walking and I thought, oh my gosh, I wonder about Jones, what's happened to them? And so it took me a while you have to go through when you're not the bishop anymore, you have to go through all the way to work yourself up to okay, I need a district superintendent. I need somebody who can give me contact name and somebody to tell me what, eventually I did get a name and I call over there and I'm explaining, who I am, which is not much anymore. I mean, I'm a retired Methodist bishop and I'm just like 3 miles down the road from you. And I ask, who's serving? Well, there isn't anybody there, which is what I'd figured out by then. And I said, when was the last time you had communion? February. That's when they went, that's when they closed, when the pandemic hit and we all shut our doors for a while. Mm-hmm. And I said to them, I said, well, are you meeting at all? Oh yeah, we have never quit meeting. We just
they're their own bubble, right? Small towns like that can do that.
Rural Texas.
They masked up. They did all this stuff. They socially distanced. They did all that. And they said, this church will not close. And so that's what they did. And I said, well, would you like me to come? And I'll be happy to bring communion. And they're like, don't know what to make of this either, and I don't know what to make of them. But anyway, so I showed up, they showed up, and we used those god-awful little cups, the little things where you peel it back so that supposedly there are no germs on this. And, I did something I would have never thought I'd do. I put on plastic gloves to pass out communion. It is against everything I know about being authentic. And anyway, but you know what? I liked them, they liked me. So we agreed on a once a month that I'd come. And so we have communion once a month. I preach once a month. I said to them after a while, I was like, okay, I pulled a couple of things out of the file at the beginning. And then I said, like, okay, how are you all organizing all this? Oh, they said, we follow the lectionary. I said, well, I've heard of that. So that's how we keep our preaching straight. So there's a pattern that they know where they are in the course of the Christian year. And then I'm on the third Sunday of the month, whatever it says. And that's what I got. So I'm preaching new stuff with real people in front. And John, you'll appreciate this as pastor of a very large church. When I asked on that first phone call, I said, so like, how many people come? Well, she said, I think the smallest group we've had is 3, and the most we've had is 12. I said, okay, we can do this. So now I will say just a small amount of bragging here that's not to be repeated. Yeah, we do better than 3 on a regular basis. and I mean, it's good for them and good for me. And
well, they have a celebrity for their preacher now. Do you know who else did that? So Bishop Dick Looney. And when he retired, he was actually our bishop in South Georgia. He was the first bishop in South Georgia when they gave South Georgia its own bishop. And when he retired, he came back and he said to us that the most growth and the most wonderful time in his ministry was after he retired and he went back to Holston, which is up in Appalachia, and he started serving this little tiny church.
Wow.
And he's like, it's been the most rewarding thing that he said he's ever done.
Mm.
I feel,
That's great.
I'm a pastor again, and it's the same people, in front of you week after week. So you develop a relationship,
Yeah, see him in the grocery store.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like your second Sunday is open, so you can come to Chapelwood on the second Sunday, or fourth or first. It sounds like you've got all those available.
My family has told me I have enough jobs now. So.
Well, hey, tell us about this past 14, 15, 16 months for you. You've written this great article, which we'll put all this in the show notes on our YouTube and Facebook and everything. People can read. You've written this thing for the Texas Methodist Foundation, well, I think in conjunction with them, but it's Reservoirs of Resilience in Uncertain Times. And it's really resonated with me because it's exactly how we are coming out of pandemic at Chapelwood and what we're focusing on. Barbara Brown Taylor's Altar in the World has really resonated with me about how you develop these real spiritual practices in real time, in real life, in real ways that help you to dig, whether you want to call them deeper reservoirs or deeper wells or some capacity. What I found is that in these past, what is it now, 16 months, 14 months, whatever it's been, it's like the pandemic and the racial issues and the political partisan issues and the cultural issues, just name them. It's like they've peeled layers away from us. And I think that most people fall into generally one of 2 categories. Either they found something in there that they didn't know they had that was able to help them through this, some reservoir, or kind of like an onion, they kept peeling and peeling and peeling, and there wasn't anything there to help them. And it seems like to me, coming out of this, that's one of the primary things that I think we need to do as a church is rekindle community and connection, but also help people to cultivate these spiritual practices, ways of living life that give us just the tools or the whatever word you want to use, practices in real life, because we're going to be confronted with this stuff over and over and over again. Maybe not the same issues, but they'll be back. Some issue will be back. Mm-hmm.
That's right. Well, and they've been there all along. I mean, we could go back to the Old Testament and you just think about Think about Walter Brueggemann's work about orientation, disorientation, reorientation. That's been going on,
Yes.
whether it was, the Babylonian exile or some other thing that people had to respond, and they had to look deep into their own hearts or maybe better said, listen to the voice of God, but usually that heard within their own hearts. And to be, Jeremiah, even for all the things he said, he was a hopeful guy. He said, go buy a piece of land and plant vineyards. And that's where we are, it seems to me. We've got a lot peeled away, but we also have lots to be able to, God's leading us to be able to look to the future with hope. And that's why, for me, these spiritual, I don't want to call them disciplines, but they're practices. These spiritual practices are the core of what helps us move toward resilience.
Yeah, one of the things I read an article years ago in getting ready for a sermon, and it was from one of these, university systems that does agricultural resource, and it was in the Midwest somewhere, and it was about digging a well. And what they talked about is how deep you dig the well, and it has a lot to do on a lot of factors. But the one thing that stood out to me is that if you're in a place where there's a lot of activity near a city, you have to dig, or roads or traffic or pollution or whatever, you have to dig your well a lot deeper so that the earth, the water that comes down through the earth, it serves as a filtration. But if you're out in a place where you're out in the free roaming country and there's not a lot of traffic or buildings or whatever you want to call it, smog, you can drill lower. Depends on the water table, but you can drill it lower because it filters the water. And I think, man, that's kind of the way it is in our lives, is that you have some seasons where you're living out in the fields in the countryside, and the well doesn't have to be quite as deep. But man, I'll tell you, in recent life, it's like you almost can't dig it deep enough, because if you dig it too shallow, that water is just not very useful in your life.
That's a great image.
When you hear yourself using such an organic image, and you in looking at the paper, almost every image I chose is an organic image, and I think that's because that's the world, that's the core for me. That's how God made us, and I think that ecology and this new field of ecology that we're paying much more attention to now has lots to teach us about resilience. And there are a lot of definitions of resilience going on out there, but the one that ecologists use, and I just stumbled into this. I was reading in some things that, how the world is changing. These are two Australian ecologists who defined resilience as the capacity of a system or enterprise to absorb disturbance and reorganize so that their core purpose and identity continues in the face of changed circumstances. That's like a big mouthful, but it's also really helpful to think about, what does that mean for us in the church, to be able to absorb all this disturbance that you just outlined at the beginning of this conversation, but for us as people of faith to reorganize ourselves so that our core purpose, and then that means you got to be really clear about what your core purpose is, and our core identity, which means you got to be really clear about what your core identity continues, even though the circumstances are dramatically changed. So I think that sends us back to Jesus. I think that sends us out into the world. I think that these organic pictures of things, like your reference to the well, it helps us get a sense of where God's calling us.
It also seems like it provides some, at least not a a system of way forward, but it provides this framework that says the things and maybe the way the church has been operating up to this point, there's things that are shifting, things that are falling away, things that, as John will say, need to be recalibrated, reimagined, right? And that's to incorporate these practices and this imagery of this kind of reorientation, so that we can continue on in the same purpose, I think is super helpful. Yeah.
I just give God thanks that Brueggemann keeps writing because he keeps reminding me, whether it's, Here Comes the Poet or whether it's in the Psalms, he keeps reminding me again and again that life for everyone, there is a season of orientation, hopefully a good long season, but there will come to everyone a season of disorientation. And God is as present in that season, moving toward reorientation as God is,
Amen.
When things are, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I mean, so it's, I just think it's a very helpful framework for people who are going, not just the church in the situation we're in, but also for individual lives. One of the things that I referenced in this, I heard about a church in San Antonio, and this is a big church, one of the associate pastors while the pandemic, we know everybody was not going to, we were all closed up. Everything was virtual. We're online. She had the idea that what if we curate some folks who have been through hard times, people from our congregation, and it's a big city, so it's got lots of possibilities, and curate those and do them kind of like you're doing a podcast, except this was all video. And they did about 12 of those on a Sunday evening. And people talked about, again, my language from Brueggemann is orientation, disorientation, reorientation. They talked about it as wilderness times and how God was present in the wilderness coming out on the other side. So you had people, laity, teaching laity, encouraging, supporting laity. By just, now they have a whole, they've got a whole drawer full of video of people saying, but now it's okay.
Right.
I've listened to a number of those. Some of them are just really powerful. They range everything from, homelessness, job loss, sexual abuse, post-traumatic stress. It's a wide ranging, but it's a fascinating story of God seeing us through.
A lot of what you write about too reminds me of a lot of stuff I've read about, change management theory of, you have to have this unfreezing process, and then you have to have what they call cognitive restructuring. You have to learn something new, and then it refreezes into a new reality. But one of the things they talk about, when I've seen this through church mergers or changes in our own individual lives, is that, and you use the term core purpose and identity. If people feel like they're going to lose their identity, they will not make the changes they need to make. It's why, as a bishop, you'll go into some little old struggling church, and they know they need to change, and they know they need to reach the people in their community.
Right.
But something threatens their identity. They just can't do it.
They lock it down.
And they would rather die and just the last one out, turn off the lights, than change.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things is I've just kind of thought about the past, 14, 15, 16 months is a lot of people are responding to the difficulty and that we've all experienced in so many different ways as sort of a fight or a flight. They either huddled up in their home and locked in, or, man, they go to war, right? And I think the people who, in either way, feel a threat to their identity, the people who are fighting, like the people who are mad or angry,
Yep.
it's like they think they're going to lose some core piece of their identity. And kind of what I think needs to be done, the church, is to help people understand that identity that you're afraid to lose is not really the identity that you have in Christ.
Right.
And I think that's a big fundamental thing. I think we have to blame ourselves in the churches and pastors for not really helping people do this hard work. We've kind of dealt more with the felt needs and not dealt with difficult issues.
Yeah.
And so now people are in a bad place, and they're acting out of their instinct because they think their identity is threatened. Mm-hmm. And what I want to say is, man, you've got an identity, but it's rooted in the wrong things.
Mm-hmm. And I also wonder if I can reorient. Oh, go ahead.
Just real quick, one thing back to you, Don. I think that's where the focus now on what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus, and that clarity about that is so important, because that's an identity.
Mm-hmm.
If yes, you are, no, you're not. It's an identity. Matt, sorry I interrupted.
No. I think that's right. I mean, I think that somewhat what the church has done in terms of, is we've taught a type of faith that's been much more rooted in certainty than it is in risking forward in this mystery that is God. And so much of our faith has been about really not risking anything. It's been about really tying it down, making sure the system works, all those kinds of things. And now we're in this place of disorientation where the system that we've been propping up actually doesn't work in times of reorientation, right? That we need the core of who God is continues to call us forward in faith and in trust and in risk. And I think that's what I find to be both exciting and disturbing about this time.
I agree.
Could I ask, you pick hope and purpose and courage. Out of why those three out of all the other kind of words you might have picked as well? Like what's captured your imagination about those three?
I think, I chose hope because I think it is fundamental to change and fundamental to faith. If I were to look through the scriptures, go to Genesis to Revelation, and certainly in between, the Bible is a story of hope. You got Noah sending out the dove, looking for there to come back in, and finally she shows up, with a piece of something green in her beak. Go all the way to Revelation and talk about the new Jerusalem, the heavenly city. So for me, hope bookends who we are as people of faith, and it's our beginning point, and in many ways, it's our ending point. So for me, you got to, things start there as a practice. I'm really. When I was writing this, again and again, I was listening to John Lewis. This was not too long after his death that I was actually sitting in the computer writing this. And John Lewis, he probably is one of the most articulates hope more clearly than almost anybody else at that point in time. And he just thinks you never give up on hope, and that you get into trouble, good trouble, because he's about making change, but that what leads him there is hope, and what keeps him there despite all the difficulties in his own life and the life of his people. It was hope. So that's why I started out with hope, and I chose courage. It could have been around. I was kind of it's purpose and also identity. Those things are really closely related, because you got to know who you are, and who you are is very closely connected to what your purpose is. And for any of us as individuals, and I think this is true for congregations too, you kind of, what is our purpose? And if our purpose is all enclosed, taking care of one another, and it's very closed up, that's not a purpose that's going to keep us around very long, and nor it should. Jesus calls us to a much higher purpose than that. He lived a life of much high purpose. And I think getting clear about our purpose is absolutely essential. And then courage is just, oh my gosh, courage is the willingness to lead without regard for the difficulties and without reward, really. It's the willingness to lead and move forward without regard for the rewards that you might or might not get. Wow. I think it's the most difficult. We've come, my generation, I mean, y'all are younger than I am, but my generation has come through and what in many ways was kind of and we didn't think of it as easy, but as you looking back on it from where we might be sitting now, it looked a lot easier because the church was on the ascent. So because we were ascending, it didn't take nearly as much courage to stand up and preach the truth. But after a while, it became clear that we were descending as a church. And when a congregation or a church does that, then speaking the truth and preaching the gospel that Jesus preached. I ask myself, how come nobody's preaching on the Beatitudes? Are we not preaching the Sermon on the Mount? So, I mean, that takes courage, especially in this environment, So, I mean, that's why I chose. I think courage is essential. And every quote leader in the Bible, I mean, it's a little, everyone that I can think of that we're being called to learn from, they are all courageous people, every last one of them. And they dealt with hard things.
Yeah, no, and I think, of my own years in ministry. I think it's been easier up until about the last 5 or 6 years. There's something that happened in the last 5 or 6 years. I don't think it's one thing, but it's just as a whole, all of the things together. But it does seem like it's a lot harder. I thought maybe it was just because I moved to Texas and came to Chapelwood, and that was why it was harder. But I've heard from other people back in Georgia that it's hard there too. So apparently it's hard everywhere. I love one thing you made me think about hope, and you say in your article that hope is rugged. It's more than simple optimism. And I always have said, hope. People think like wishful optimism is hope, but optimism is rooted in circumstances, where hope is rooted in this volitional commitment. Just like I think love is the same way. Yeah. You don't love just because I feel like I love you today. Love is a volitional verb and commitment. And you even say, hope as a verb is a potent word.
Right. And it's muscular. And this is true for all three of those things, but this is particularly, I think, true in hope. It takes practice. I mean, it takes practice. And so resilience comes as we practice hoping, and hoping now in this verb sense, the active sense, the we're moving forward. It's the John Lewis sense of keep walking, take the next step. Even if it's hard, you take the next step.
I even think like, so let's just take, there's so many different issues we've dealt with, pandemic and race and but I just think about politics and think about the sides, right, if you will, and how little hope there is. Both sides, it doesn't matter which end you're on, kind of feel like the world's going to,
hell in a handbasket.
I got to say it a nice way, the world's just going to pot. And it's going in the wrong direction, and it's the other team's fault, right? But there's no sense. Now, I get that sense from people who are more moderate or centrist, that, like even my mentality is, man, we've engaged in this unique American experiment for a long time, and we haven't always gotten it right, but, we keep moving forward. So I have a sense of hope that I choose to have, that we're going to make it through this as hard as it is. But I get a sense that just as a culture, there's not a lot of hope out there for the denomination, for sociological issues, for political issues, for whatever. I mean, there's just hopelessness. That's not a good place to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, at the same time that it's not a good place for the culture to be, the denomination to be, it is the place where people of faith, Christians, those who follow Jesus, it's where we step forward and act courageously to hope. Hope again as a verb, as an active verb. Krista Tippett is opening up a new podcast thing I read, and she's calling it, the muscle of hope. I see that's another good word. Hope is a muscle. I mean, maybe she read my paper. I don't know, but it's, but those are the people, those are the voices we want to listen to and to follow. Those who understand that, we hope because we have faith in God and in Christ and in the power of the Spirit.
You use this word a lot, or at least this, you allude to this whole thing about oscillation, patterns of oscillation. Over a lifetime, oscillating patterns of inward to outward, private prayer, public witness, personal holiness, social holiness expands our capacity to become purposeful, courageous, and resilient. But when you think about oscillation, help people understand, like, what does that mean for you, oscillating?
And you know what an oscillating current is. It's got up and down. Life comes to us. We're not always on a high point. Thank God we're not always on a low point, but it's moving through those. There's some work that's been done by child psychologists about children living through various kinds of trauma and which ones are able to respond and to move through in a good way and those who are not. And one of the things they discovered is that the stories that are told in their family about what happened, that if those stories are seen as things it was really tough and we didn't have, and there's all that, but, and then you have whatever the but is that caused that, and this is how we got through. That children hearing those kinds of family stories over time incorporate that into who they are.
That's right.
And that they seem to do better in terms of coming through on the other side of trauma in their lives. I just find that fascinating that certainly, we know this in terms of spiritual life. I mean, there are all kinds of ways to pray. And sometimes at one point in one's life, it may all be contemplative prayer. But at another point, we need the community around us physically supporting and holding us. That's, again, this kind of balance that's not a stasis where you're just stuck in one place, but rather it's this movement of up to down and connecting in various ways. I don't know if that's clear enough, but what I'm trying to express is that it's a balance, not as stuntness, but as a movement, an inward. It's like breathing, an inward flow, an outward flow, an inward flow, an outward flow. That's the story of our lives. That's the story of faith. Jesus, we can look at the creeds and just see that he was born of the Virgin Mary, suffered, now he dropped, rose again. And at the end he rises. It is the story of our faith.
Yes.
It's the story of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so helping people see that and incorporate that into the journeys of their own lives is part of what I think we're blessed to do as pastors.
Yeah. I just, I think of an oscillating fan in my back porch we've had the hottest summer that we've had like forever. And I have this big oscillating fan. And when I sit out there by myself, I can turn the oscillation off and it just blows on me. But if I have other people I love, like my wife or my daughter, and I turn the oscillation on, I don't get the cool air all the time. I have to share it with them. So it's off of them and it's hot. And I just think of culture like that. It's just like, I don't really want like the bad time. I don't want the hot time. I just want the fan blowing on me all the time.
I want to control
and
it.
that's like, we only want the good, but it's just not the way life works.
No.
And especially, like you said, the core purpose and identity, if I look around and I'm in the company of other people that I love, why am I not willing to let some fan blow on them? But I think the recognition that I think some of that you wrote, like there was on one page where you talked about, and American Christians have become more accustomed from moving from strength to strength, victory to victory, rather than any wails or dependence on God. I think about the prosperity gospel that has been really big in, or any type of this Christian secularism or Christian nationalism, where it's only victory, it's only riches, it's only blessing, and words like lament, learning prayers of lament. Brueggemann writes a lot about that as well, is that, I've always told people when I go through it, it's like read the first 10 chapters of Psalms. 7 of them are Psalms of lament, which gives you a sense of the language of the people of God. And yet we don't teach our people to lament because we're always trying to focus on the good. And I think, again, that's another way that we haven't done a good job preparing people for the desert wilderness.
Yeah.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I grew up on a farm, so I think this sense of seasons is partly just in my own bones. And when you think about the scriptures, all of them are in an agriculture-based world. We have an industrial, communication. None of that exists. And so the sense of seasons, but also this, and by that I mean, I'm not just talking about summer, winter, spring, and fall, but rather drought and rain, and that, in God's good time, there's manna from heaven. And that's what we hope for. Yeah. So that kind of sense of season, of balance, of oscillating, I find that very helpful. I'll say, we look at the history of Methodism in the U.S. I was thinking about this the other. So Brooks Holyfield was not him for a professor. He's retired now.
I had him too.
Did you? Okay.
Oh my gosh, he killed my paper. He didn't like he was very. Don't you remember how hard he was on like grading your grammar? He liked simple short sentences. Okay, anyway, continue. I just have some scars left
trauma
from Professor Holyfield.
Figured out you would have had Brooks Holyfield. Anyway, so when he looks at the beginning of Methodism, and think about this in oscillation. So you look at the beginning of Methodism, we start out, our main way of communicating the gospel was revivals. That's the first 100 years, it's revivals. And then out of the revivals came the beginning of sort of the next phase, because people left those big camp meetings, says Brooks Holyfield, and some of them started congregations, some of them started small groups. And so then slowly we populate, and then through Asbury, we have the whole sense of here we have congregations kind of coming into being. And of course, the big split then in 1844. Now, and then we moved into these big structures of the denomination. And I think it's pretty clear that the kind of huge superstructures that we once saw are not going to be there anymore. But there are other things being born at the same time. And that's, again, I find that very hopeful. We've been focused on attractional model church. That's who we've been at least since the 70s. Yeah. That's kind of how we defined, and we did, to go back to an ecological metaphor, we are not right now very biodiverse. I mean, we are mostly into attractional model congregations, but that's already changing because we're starting to see new forms. We're seeing some very interesting experimenting going on with, I mean, what you've got at Chapelwood. I mean, I know you don't call it a church, but Spring Spirit. People come together, they pray, they learn, they're engaged with each other. I mean, isn't that a big chunk of what the church does?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's that. We've got other more missional models kind of popping up. There's just a variety of new forms, and I don't know what will hang around and what will. I don't think attractional model will completely go away, but I think it will want to more clearly help its people to be disciples of Christ, and we'll get more focused in our congregations on what it means. I mean, that's identity as a disciple of Christ, and what is our purpose as a whole church full of disciples. Anyway, that's kind of I find that very hopeful. We've come through changes before. We've made some mistakes, but we'll come through changes again. It'll just have some difference than it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of that attractional model. My grandmother used to call it, she says, he's a mile wide and an inch deep.
Right.
And I think that, we've done a lot of the high energy, attractional, rah-rah, and it feels good at the time. But what I think we learned, if we hadn't learned it this past year, I don't know that we're going to learn it, is that we've got to have some resources, reservoirs, capabilities, wells, access to something way more than we've had access to. And so I think you're going to see a lot of churches going a lot deeper than they are wide. And I don't think that's cutting off or limiting what they'll do as far as a focus, but I think it's going to be more targeted. I think you're going to see more diversity. Like when you talk about Spring Spirit over on our Campbell Road campus, we're partnering with them even more to think about what does this hybrid relationship look like. So instead of us going out thinking that we're going to plant a church somewhere, what if we are in closer connection with this unique ministry that's had great success reaching the neighborhood or the Hispanic families? And what if we just come alongside them instead of saying we got to do it our way on our playbook? Let's explore what this hybrid option looks like. And it'll be a whole new way of defining what a church will be here. But it's got the potential to reach thousands of people on a weekly basis through soccer, through baseball, through spiritual ministry, through mentoring education, through all these sorts of things.
I mean, it's impressive. It's impressive. So thank you all that are involved with Chapelwood in doing this.
Hey, so what are you looking forward to now that, pandemic is somewhat over? What are you looking forward to?
Well, one thing we're looking forward to at TMF, and I'll just say start with that, is being able to be back together in person again. Yeah. I mean, this has been a long, thank goodness for Zoom. We've all learned how to use Zoom in new ways. I mean, I will never travel as much as I once did. That's all good. Having said that, there is nothing that takes the place of holding hands together.
That's right. That's right.
And listening to each other's story and watching somebody's body language and our playing together, or that's just irreplaceable. And I think we're such an embodied faith that we really need to. And I look forward to getting back together. And so that's one for sure. And I'm just down the road from our son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren, and the two older ones now. But one is at A&M, the other one starts Texas Tech this fall. But I have a little 10-year-old down the road. So we just came back from a big camping trip with him. So I love this, and
awesome.
and even more than I did before. I love watching the sun come up every morning, and the stars come out at night. I mean, where
Deep
I
in the
live
heart of
now-
Texas.
Where I live now, it happens every day where I can see it. No
Yes,
building,
right.
You're not in Houston where there's a smog layer and there's
Lord.
no stars. Yeah.
anyway, that I don't think that'll ever change. That what a gift that is every single morning.
We do know I want to thank you so much for being with us, and I love you so much and think the world of you, so I'm not going to ask you any questions about what you think is going to happen in the United Methodist Church. How does that sound?
Well, I think that none of us know really right now what's going to happen in the United Methodist Church.
We'll get
but-
you back when we know more. We'll talk about it.
All right, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. I'll come back.
Well, we
All
miss
right.
we miss seeing you in these parts, but hope that you get back around soon now that
Absolutely.
the pandemic's over.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Let me know when you're on the road preaching second Sunday.
Don't look for it anytime soon.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. We love you. Bye bye.
Thanks, Bishop.
She's missed.
Yeah, deeply. Just her steady way about her is,
So I remember, I don't remember what year it was, but there was, it was one of those years at a general conference in the Methodist Church, and man, they were like, it was this really contentious, like vote on something, and
Yeah.
she was in the chair presiding.
yeah, she was the
I mean,
council of bishops
Yeah, and
president.
just the way she handled
Oh.
what was probably one of the most difficult processes.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah.
had some bishops that she does it really well. We've had some that don't do it very well.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not going to mention any names.
Yeah.
But she is a pro.
Yeah,
I mean,
she
you
really
talk
is.
about,
Yeah.
it ain't a hobby for her. It ain't a hobby.
And she's a non-anxious presence. I think she had a real view towards like how do we empower young she saw the change coming, in the denomination, and she
yeah.
really empowered younger pastors with capacities, knowing that those folks are now in the midst of all of this change, and she doubled down on how do we equip those folks that would be in this very situation.
I don't know
we're in
the
now.
exact data points, but I do know that when she came, she was here for like 12 years in the Texas conference. When she came, the average age of a pastor was like X. And when she left, it was like 15 or 20 years lower.
Yeah.
Because she had done such a good job recruiting and pulling in
Right.
younger pastors. And so the Texas conference still benefits from all of that she's done. But
Yeah.
she's something else. Can't
Sure
wait
is.
for her to get over here and preach.
Is it the second Sunday of
Second
every month?
Sunday of something we're going to get her. Well, I'm John Stevens.
And I'm Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.